the closest the two countries have come to an armed conflict since 1962. Indian troops have been put on the highest level of alert. This as the PLA tries every trick in the book to intrude. The Indian Army has also now deployed special mountain forces at friction points. Our correspondent Abhishek Bhalla is on ground zero in Ladakh and tells you exactly what's happening on the LAC. Take a look.
Indian Army is in a state of highest alert along the line of actual control. Defences have been ramped up with special mountain warfare forces deployed at all friction points along the LAC.
At a time when the talks are on to de-escalate the situation, the Chinese troops are creating another friction point south of Pangong.
The Chinese have made multiple attempts to dislodge Indian troops from the heights they are holding. The mountain warfare forces have been added on the Pangong Lake's north and south banks to support the Special Frontier Force, which brought the strategic heights firmly under Indian control.
दक्षिण पंगोंग सो लेक में चीन की फौज ने कोशिश की ऊपर आने के लिए जहां भारत की फौज थी उनको पता चल गया और एसएसएफ स्पेशल सिक्योरिटी फोर्स कर्नल जमवाल वो जो ट्रेन होते हैं चक्राता में एस्टेब्लिशमेंट 22 खुफिया जगह है वो थे उधर उन्होंने भारत की मदद की और उन्होंने चीन को ढकेल दिया.
In another big move, the Indian Army has put barbed wire as obstacles at heights under its control to discourage PLA troops from trying to cross the line. Tensions at the LAC are at its highest since the 1962 war, with both India and China setting up major build-up tanks and infantry in the eastern Ladakh sector. But India's aggressive stance has sent a clear message to China. Its sinister expansionist plans won't work.
The situation on the line of actual control has been described as a state of highest alert, and those tracking developments on the ground say a small spark can lead to things completely spiraling out of control. Over the last few days, the Indian forces have seen Chinese movement and mobilization, and in some friction points, the troops are only meters away with heavy arms, making the situation extremely fragile. With camera person Satya, Abhishek Bhalla in Leh for India Today.
And the meeting between the Chinese and the Indian foreign ministers has begun in Moscow. This critical meeting that could decide whether the two countries are able to disengage or whether war is inevitable. The big questions: will last-minute diplomacy prevent an armed conflict between India and China? Is the flare-up on the LAC imminent and, as some analysts are saying, inevitable? Will China give up occupied Indian territory? Can India hold on to the heights that they now control? These are some of the questions I'll ask three experts who are joining me today. Lieutenant General D.S. Huda, former GOC Northern Command, so knows the area like the back of his hand. Vijay Nambiar, one of the country's most distinguished diplomats, former envoy to China. And Professor Bharma Chilani, strategic affairs expert who has tracked China for years now. Appreciate these three fine minds joining me right at the very top. Let's ask that big question. Am I right, Brahma, in suggesting that this meeting between the Indian and the Chinese foreign ministers now is critical to avoid an armed conflict? Has it come down to that?
It's critical, but neither side wants a war. The situation has gone from bad to worse because of the collapse of the disengagement deal India's NSA concluded with China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, who's also state councillor and special representative. Jaishankar is holding talks with Wang Yi this evening. It's the same gentleman who concluded that deal with Ajit Doval. Under the deal, India created buffer zones, as in Galwan Valley, Hot Springs, and Gogra. But China failed to honor the deal. In fact, it used the deal to rush forces into Devsang, where it has occupied the critical Y junction, which controls access to several areas. Devsang is of utmost importance to Indian defenses. India is facing, as you know, two major crises at the moment: a fast-growing COVID crisis and a deep slump of the economy. This is the greatest ever contraction of the Indian economy. And on top of that, we have a third crisis, the China crisis. So this is a terrible time for India for a war with China. But for China also, this is a bad time to start a war against India. China has invited an international backlash against its expansionism and muscular policies. Such a war against India will only cast greater unfavorable light on China's expansionism.
So you're saying both the countries would ideally like to pull back. Vijay Nambiar, given what Professor Brahmachelani is saying, the two countries want to pull back. Do you see diplomacy still working? It hasn't worked over the last 4 months. There have been different efforts made behind the scenes, but they haven't worked. What makes you believe, or do you believe that things could get different, that Moscow could be the place where this chill could finally be, where we could finally witness a thaw?
I agree that on the military side, there is really, the situation is on a knife edge. And also that diplomatically, the level of trust is absolutely low. But at the same time, I think, and I recognize, both sides recognize that going to war is not the solution. And therefore, I think the first biggest priority for the foreign ministers meeting is to try and ensure that there is no further escalation of the situation now. The question of de-escalation can come only after that. The first thing is to avoid further escalation through any kind of military action, retaliation in South Pangong to reverse the proactive action which was taken by the Indian Army as a response to the earlier actions after Foreign Minister Wang himself had suggested that there should be. So in some ways, I think there is a danger of provocation at any stage. The protocols can easily be breached. What people need to ensure and the foreign ministers need to address is there is no further escalation at this stage. Then after that, I think they would have to address, if there is some agreement and on that, they will have to address, while the military standoff remains, how to try and have non-military areas to defuse the atmosphere.
So what you are saying is this meeting first target is to prevent further escalation, de-escalation takes place in stage 2. Given that, General Huda, former GOC Northern Command, the fact is there are heights where the two armies are now 300 meters away from each other. And we have had firing for the first time in 45 years 2 days ago. Given what you are hearing from the ground, what we are hearing from the ground, the situation could easily spiral out of control. Is it possible to prevent further escalation, given that each side seems keen to retain this territory that they have, and the Chinese want to get back some of those heights that reportedly we have got in the last few days?
So Rajdeep, I agree with earlier, panelists who say that both countries don't want to go to war. The fact is, situation on the ground, military to military, what is happening on the ground has a life of its own. And therefore, despite all our best intentions that, matters should not escalate, as long as there is no breakthrough in the deadlock that has happened, as long as there is no move forward on the disengagement process, I'm afraid, despite all that we wish for, the situation on ground is a hair trigger. Please look at, what soldiers on the ground and the young company commanders would be feeling. They've occupied dominating heights in the South Bank. The Chinese obviously want them to go back. There is a huge chance for, miscalculation. It's now weapons free. the standard operating procedures have been revised. Thankfully, nobody's got shot and killed in fighting, but it could well happen. So I see unless there is some kind of a breakthrough which gets translated on ground and you see some kind of a disengagement process taking place, I'm afraid, despite our desires and wishes and intentions to not escalate the situation, things could go completely out of control.
Just for our viewers, 300 meters away from each other on the heights of eastern Ladakh, General Huda, what is the message to those military commanders on the ground? From your experience as former GOC Northern Command, when you say that, there could be, things could easily spiral out of control, is the message that we don't strike first, but if the Chinese were to once again resort to provocative actions, we have no choice but to hit back now?
See, Rajdeep, I think we should see this, in light of what has happened. I was there during the tumor incident, and we had, almost 1,000 soldiers on each side, facing off at a distance of 1 to 2 meters.
1 to 2 meters?
The difference in that face-off and this current situation, Rajdeep, is that there was respect for agreements and protocols on both sides. That has completely broken down after what the Chinese did. Restraint on both sides is not there. As I said earlier, the standard operating procedures have been revised. If the Chinese attempt to do something, would the Indian Army soldiers on ground be even willing to accept the kind of thing that happened when these people intruded and, got into our territory? So therefore, that's the reason I'm saying that things are, as somebody else said, things are at a knife's edge. And unless there is some substantive move, and the talks move forward, I think we could see. And what is there to prevent, any side from doing what has happened in the South Bank in some other area, open up another front. So I think unless there's a breakthrough, we are going to be, seeing some very tense military escalation happening.
Very tense military escalation is possible. You're the second General Huda. Last night I had General Pangong, and he was also suggesting on similar terms that a military conflict may well seem inevitable. Vijay Nambiar, given that the army generals on the ground are worried about the situation escalating out of control, has the time come for Prime Minister Modi and President Xi, who supposedly had this special relationship, to pick up the phone and talk to each other? Why has that hotline not been activated? If the relationship between India and China at the top level between the Prime Minister and the President was so good, surely they could have worked towards de-escalation. But we haven't heard of that. The Mamalapuram spirit, the spirit of Ahmedabad, where the Chinese and Indian leaders were on a swing with each other, all that seems to have disappeared. Has the time come for the two leaders now to take the initiative? Are they ready for that?
I think this is just that step short of the top level. Clearly, Wangi is not in a position to be able to decide definitively on how trust can be brought back, if there is at all any possibility of that happening. Both sides will have to give face, as it were. They will have to do something that will keep keep the prestige intact, and therefore some bit of acceptance on both sides, giving compromise on both sides has to be done. And that cannot be done at this level. It can only be done at the top level. Clearly, the instructions on the military side have come from on top. And now, if there is any, at the military level, I think this standoff will remain. And the two foreign ministers will have to work just for that kind of a conversation at the top level to prepare the ground for some way in which the mutual kind of give face to each other at this level and then slowly try to defuse the situation. And I think that kind of giving in to each other cannot happen at the military level at this stage. It will have to happen in the non-military level.
Yes, but the non-military level, does it, as you said, do the foreign ministers try and prepare the ground, Mr. Nambiar, for the prime ministers to meet, for the prime minister and the president to talk to each other?
I think they will probably have to do that because I don't think at this level it can be resolved.
That is a very critical point you're making. Brahma Chilani, you want to dive in on that, that this will now have to be resolved with Prime Minister Modi and President Xi. Do they have it in them to restore, if they have such a special relationship, and Prime Minister Modi has been seen to have a special relationship with the Chinese leadership, is it time now for him to encash on that? He should be picking up the phone surely and speaking to President Xi if the two forces are on the verge of a military conflict, and which all of you are suggesting the two sides don't want.
If Modi had such a special relationship with Xi Jinping, would India have faced this kind of brazen aggression by China since April? If anything, Modi must be reeling from the trust that he had reposed in Xi Jinping. He met Xi Jinping 18 times. In fact, ever since Modi came to office, he bent over backward to placate China. He delisted China as a country of concern. He took several other steps, including ending official contact with the Dalai Lama. All these steps failed to appease China. And I think one most significant aspect about the current situation, which we tend to forget, is that this kind of aggression is very unusual. China has made land grabs below the threshold of armed conflict.
No, so therefore, sorry, Professor Chilani, to intervene. Therefore, how does that square up with your belief that the Chinese don't want a conflict? Who is to say they don't want it? Maybe they do want a localized conflict.
No, they have achieved broadly their territorial objectives below the threshold of armed conflict. They have also forced India to divert major resources to national defense at a time when the Indian economy has registered its worst ever contraction. Such diversion of resources dovetails with China's strategy to weaken and contain India. If they can continue to wage psychological warfare against India, if they can continue to tie down India while they maintain their territorial gains,
right,
they would have a win-win situation for themselves.
So you're saying it's 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Is that what you're saying? That the Chinese have already taken the 2 steps forward. Now, whatever is happening is at best to take 1 step back so they retain some of the gains they made in April, May.
Well, the fact is that India's official demand, as reiterated by the Indian Foreign Secretary just last week, is a return to status quo ante.
Yes.
Diplomacy will not deliver status quo ante to India. That is unmistakably clear. The Chinese have no intention of vacating the land grabs that they have made. And as far as military options are concerned, those options have increasingly become tougher for India because the PLA has massed almost 50,000 forces just on the Ladakh frontier. So the third option that India is not willing to undertake is to mount escalating costs on China, non-military costs, because India is in a position, given its buying leverage, the fact that the trade relationship is so lopsided in China's favor, and also given the fact that China is now facing growing international pressure, India can exercise its diplomatic leverage, its economic leverage, and mount increasing costs on China to end its aggression. That is the third option and the most credible option that India needs to exercise.
You know, but the fact is, General Huda, that we were told that in the last week itself, India has captured certain critical heights. I want to understand, does that not give us greater leverage when we are holding these talks? The fact that we have captured certain critical heights, or at least retained certain critical heights in the Kailash range, does that not give us greater leverage, sir?
So Rajdeep, just to step back a bit, and what Mr. Brahmachalani was trying to point out, if you look at the areas in which the Chinese initially included, mainly in the Pangong and the Depsang area, these were areas that were considered as disputed, and they came into these areas, to establish their territorial claims, which largely they seem to have succeeded in doing that. Coming to, the south bank of Pangong, so I think we should look at this whole area not so much in geographical terms. There's just too much focus on, Blacktop and Helmet and these areas. I think we should look at it in psychological terms. And I think what the intention from at least the Indian side was to put some kind of psychological pressure on China that the current deadlock in talks and the Chinese just refusal to go back, from Pangong and the Epsang area is not acceptable to us. Whether the psychological pressure plays out, how it plays out, escalation again has its own sort of dynamics. If there is a breakthrough in the talks, between the two foreign ministers, we could say that what India did, has given us an advantage. Will it lead to further escalation in different areas along Ladakh? It's an 800-kilometer LAC, Rajdeep. It's not held like the line of control. So will it see further escalation in other areas? And that's where my large concern, Rajdeep, is unless there is a breakthrough diplomatically, the military escalation cycle is something that you are going to get involved in, and it could only grow further.
That is extremely worrying. General Huda, what you've just told our viewers is extremely worrying. Unless there's a diplomatic breakthrough now, the military escalation spiral could rapidly go out of control. General Huda, Vijay Nambiar, Brahma Chelani, the three of you have given us, I think, a considered view here as to why we are possibly at the precipice. Not since 1962, perhaps, have we seen ourselves in this position. I appreciate the three of you joining us and giving us your expert opinion at the top of the news today. Thank you so much.